La China Gerardo, the boutique gardening business served as the ultimate front for a far more lucrative, underground enterprise, a highly structured murder-for-hire agency. Decades prior, a horrific car crash had permanently reshaped the family's destiny. The accident left La China physically impaired and limping, but its deepest scar was carved into her 6-year-old son, Elmer. The trauma of the collision physically damaged Elmer's right frontal lobe, completely severing his brain's ability to process or feel basic human emotions. Recognizing his psychological emptiness not as a tragedy but as an asset, La China systematically groomed her numb, unblinking son into a flawless, algorithmic contract killer. To Elmer, humans were merely organic matter. Snapping a neck or driving a spade through a skull required no more emotional output than pruning a dead branch or repotting an overgrown orchid. He became the perfect ghost, executing targets with a chilling, surgical precision, while his mother managed the wealthy clientele and collected the blood money. Together, they transformed their beautifully manicured botanical paradise into a literal graveyard, using the decomposed bodies of their victims as a secret, nutrient-rich substrate to feed the prize-winning flora above. A string of bizarre, unconnected disappearances across the region had left local authorities baffled, but Torres and Carrera suspected a singular, terrifying pattern was connecting the missing persons. As the detectives slowly began circling the perimeter of the truth, the wealthy and powerful elite continued to seek out La China's dark services. One afternoon, a deeply grieving, influential matriarch named Sabila Costera walked into the nursery with a cold demand wrapped in a heavy envelope of cash. Sabila's son, Zone, had recently died in a tragic plunge from a bridge, and she was utterly convinced that his quiet, unassuming nursery school teacher girlfriend, Violetta, had deliberately pushed him to his death. Desperate for absolute vengeance and wanting the girl wiped from existence, Sabila hired the Gerardos to stalk, kill, and permanently vanish Violetta. La China readily accepted the contract, pocketing the fortune under the false pretense that she was hoarding the cash to fund an experimental, high-end medical treatment to cure her son's psychological affliction. She quickly handed the target profile to Elmer, expecting another clean, unremarkable execution instead of seeing a target to eliminate. Something deeply buried within him flickered to life. For the very first time since his childhood accident, Elmer felt the warm, terrifying rush of human emotion. He was completely captivated by her kindness and vulnerability, falling into a clumsy, obsessive love that he didn't know how to articulate. Unbeknownst to Elmer, this sudden emotional awakening wasn't a miraculous spiritual rebirth, but rather the symptom of a rapidly growing brain tumor that was violently pressing against his damaged frontal lobe, accidentally restoring his emotional synapses. As Elmer actively stalled the execution and began engineering ways to get closer to Violetta, his sudden defiance sent shockwaves through his overbearing mother. La China noticed her son's uncharacteristic hesitation, his erratic mood swings, and his sudden reluctance to follow basic protocols. Growing incredibly panicked that Elmer's sudden obsession would unravel their entire criminal empire, La China began secretly spiking his daily meals with aggressive, sedating tablets meant to suppress his rising emotions. When that failed, she fiercely confronted him, attempting to use heavy maternal manipulation to force his hand into completing the hit on the innocent schoolteacher. Trapped on the run and losing her grip on reality, Violetta found herself backed into a corner when Orson, an enforcer hired by La China to finish the job, tracked her down in a secluded forest. In a desperate, animalistic struggle for survival, Violetta managed to fight back, swinging a heavy stone into Orson's skull and killing him on the spot. Overwhelmed by the crushing weight of her actions and realizing she now had a fresh corpse to hide, she swallowed her pride and dialed the one person capable of making bodies disappear, Elmer. Despite the bitter pain of her initial rejection, Elmer's love remained absolute, and he rushed to her side, expertly burying Orson's body in the dark woods. Following a tearful, final goodbye, a completely shattered Violetta packed her bags and left the country, unable to bear the psychological toll of being tied to 3 brutal deaths. Elmer returned to the nursery, where an explosive, toxic confrontation awaited him. He offered his mother a massive sum of blood money, pleading with her to let him use the rest of the funds to buy her a dream home in Mexico so they could finally part ways. But La China refused to lose her greatest creation. Sneaking up behind her emotionally vulnerable son, she brutally knocked him unconscious and had him dragged to a secure hospital, forcing him onto an operating table to have his brain tumor aggressively excised against his explicit will. The surgical intervention was a horrific success, permanently resetting the fragile progress Elmer had made toward becoming human. The removal of the tumor, combined with his mother's ongoing chemical regimen, completely erased his newfound capacity for love, guilt, and sorrow, throwing him right back into the cold, comforting embrace of total emotional numbness. Sometime later, a quiet, sun-drenched garden in Mexico became the family's new sanctuary, with Elmer spending his days silently working the soil, completely blank-faced and broken, acting once again as a loyal puppet to his triumphant mother. The fragile status quo was suddenly disrupted, however, when a familiar figure stepped into the garden. Violetta had returned. Haunted by her past and completely corrupted by the darkness she had run from, she looked at the hollow shell of the man who had once loved her. She didn't come to offer an apology or seek romance. Instead, she looked him dead in the eye and coldly stated that she wanted to hire his services to eliminate someone else. Standing amongst the vibrant flowers, completely devoid of the warmth he once possessed, the emotionless gardener didn't hesitate, blink, or show a single flicker of recognition. He simply raised his shears, adjusted his grip, and asked a single, chilling word, "Who?"